Hello, everyone. My name is Greg Masters. I'm the managing editor of SC Magazine, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webcast, The Yin and the Yang of Cloud Security, Detection, and Incident Response, sponsored by Palerra. It's clear now that the cloud has revolutionized the manner in which consumers and enterprises conduct business. Certainly, it offers convenience and cost savings. However, as security experts have noted from the beginning of cloud possibilities, without the right tools and skilled IT personnel in place to guard against attacks, use of cloud technologies can make networks more vulnerable. The good news is that the architecture of the newest cloud implementations are integrating more stringent security measures. Our two speakers today will be discussing threat vectors to consider when moving to the cloud, threat detection and incident response for the cloud, and how you can automate the cloud security lifecycle. Rohit Gupta, the co-founder and CEO of Palerra, has spent his entire career in enterprise software. Previously, he helped build and grow security-as-a-service offerings at BMC Software, and while at Oracle, helped significantly grow their identity and access management market presence. Jim Rivas has worked in the information security industry as an entrepreneur, writer, speaker, technologist, and business strategist. Currently, he is the founder and CEO of the Cloud Security Alliance, as well as the president of Rivas Consulting Group, where he advises clients on new IT trends. Just a note, we will have a Q&A following today's presentations, so we encourage you to send in any questions you may have via the interface at any time. Jim Rivas will be speaking first. Welcome, Jim. We're pleased to have you with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Greg, for inviting me, and I want to thank Palerra very much for sponsoring this, and it's always a pleasure to be working with SC Magazine. It's been a great partner for years. So as we are moving through this journey through the cloud, I think it's important for us to look at all the other issues, specific issues that relate to certain aspects of information security, and this is an area that we've talked about and done some research. And so I'm excited to give you a little bit of survey of some of the things that we're thinking about and we think that you need to be thinking about as well. So for those of you who are not too intimately familiar with Cloud Security Alliance, we're a global organization. We are a not-for-profit. We're focused on doing research. We provide all our research for free, so there's just hundreds of man-hours of work and labor and effort that you can go download for free. We also do provider certification. We do user certification through the CCSK program, and we're working very hard for you to build this trusted cloud ecosystem. So as I think we will always see some of these good news, bad news issues, and you hear about breaches or you hear about things like the Snowden affair and questions about whether or not we're going to need to have clouds for specific countries, specific industries. Well, I want to tell you that although certainly there's a need for private cloud, there's a lot of private clouds, there's a need for sometimes clouds to be within a national boundary. We're seeing so much adoption on a global basis for so many different reasons. So that's sort of the environment when we think about threats and we think about incident response. That's the environment we need to think about. This is a global cloud. That's the economics that make the most sense, and it is definitely something that's transforming business. So when we think about in that context, what are the trust issues that we need to be worried about? Certainly the compliance mandates will vary not only from country to country, but we need to understand what are the mandates that the provider has, what are the customer responsibilities. And a thing that we work on quite a bit at CSA is to encourage a lot of transparency on the part of all of the actors, but particularly the providers, so that we understand how they can make available to us the information we need to know for doing things like incident response or e-discovery, as well as just understanding on a proactive basis how they are managing security. It's very important. I'll talk a little bit about us understanding a lot of things about cloud are a new business model with old technology, and now we're starting to see some really exciting new technology like what Palerra does. But a lot of the security practices and the way we think about attacks, they happen still and they still apply, but we need to understand, well, what are the new twists that cloud brings. So what I wanted to talk about first was that sort of threat vector, and this is something CSA has been working on almost from the beginning, and we've had a couple iterations of this report, our top threats report, and this is qualitative. So we started without a lot of information, a lot of data, and so we had a lot of smart people look at how the cloud is structured systemically, how it functions, how it's architected, how people are using it, and for us on a qualitative basis to say what do we think those biggest threats are. So that's where this is coming from. And what we found, and not too big of a surprise, that a lot of this is about the data and the information that we put. We've done some reports recently, and I can talk to anecdotally what I see with a large organization. They may have 30 different storage as a solution, products, services that are out there. And so certainly we think a lot about making sure that we're understanding how data breaches can happen in the cloud, how we know about that, how we protect against that, how we recover from that. And related but somewhat different is data loss, and data loss can be something that's not coming from a malicious actor. It can be from some passive action that creates that. Account hijacking, this is something that really is not cloud specifically. This is something that's been happening for quite a while. We think a lot about this in terms of just web application vulnerabilities, and you could go look at the iCloud incident that happened with celebrities. And this is a matter of the fact that we do have credentials out there in so many different cloud services that the risk is that sort of cascading, and we have our credentials exposed in one area. Yeah, we're worried about what happens to that cloud service, but could there be a possibility those credentials are reused into other cloud services? So that's why we had postulated that account hijacking is a very important area to be thinking about. Insecure APIs, and one of the drivers for cloud, not only the scale of providers and Moore's Law, but it's the RESTful, representable state transfer, or service-oriented architecture that creates this sort of mashup environment. And that's a big reason why cloud has exploded. It's so quickly to innovate and put new solutions online, but a lot of that is exposing APIs which may not be secure. And so that's something, as you are mashing up in the cloud, that is a threat vector we need to understand and plan for. So some of the others that finish up the cloud threats that we've analyzed are denial of service. And what's interesting is we've even seen denial of service of cloud services that are initiated by other cloud services, not from the top tier cloud providers, but maybe lower tier cloud providers, ones you haven't heard of, but bots that are fueled by cloud services that have a lot of bandwidth and basically this on-demand use to instantiate new compute power. That is going to create a lot of issues, both the source and the target of denial services being both cloud-based. Malicious insiders, whether it's in the provider or it's in the tenant, those are still issues that we need to understand. They still play quite a bit. Some of the others that we have here, certainly it's related. One relation is the denial of service, but we've seen some abuse of cloud services have been incidents that have been caused because, again, you have this, all you need is a credit card to be able to instantiate a service. You can find a lot of ways to take advantage, and bad guys have figured out how you can take advantage of some of that cloud power. Due diligence, which I'm not going to get into a lot of, but that goes to the compliance and the transparency. But understanding, have you really understood what are all the providers that make up a solution, because there can be many, and what do you know about them are very important. And just the fact that we have a shared environment, which is sort of the backbone of the economics of cloud, that is also something we need to understand. Hey, is there a consequence if we are sharing technology, whether it's hardware or APIs or whatever else? If someone else is doing something, will that disrupt my own cloud experience? So that was sort of a qualitative view. And from a separate project we had following on that, where what we try to do is open source information about incidents that have been reported that seem to be cloud incidents. And this is a report I would encourage you to download to get more detailed information about the different incidents we saw. We wanted to see how does that correlate with the threats we had postulated. And the two that seemed to be strongest that were reported were data loss and the insecure APIs. And data loss, again, being broader because it could happen for a lot of reasons besides just a hacker breach. That makes sense that you would see more of that in the market. And again, people moving very quickly in the cloud, building new applications, seeing that there were problems with an insecure API that maybe exposed something that the developer didn't mean to expose. That's also not too surprising. And we still think that top threat research is very important to look at, because we can't always be backward looking and say we're going to develop our incident response and detection plans based on the incidents that have happened most often, but we also got to look ahead. And so we encourage you to still look real closely at all of the top threats. But it's very good to look at some of this research as well to see what has happened and why did that happen. So that was sort of my backdrop for wanting to dig a little bit more into the threat detection and incident response aspect of the presentation. So the graphic here I appropriated from our good friends over at SANS, and there are others that you will see, and they all are fairly similar. But when we think about incident response, I mean, one of the big things we think about is plan for it happening, plan for bad things happening, and that's very important. Be proactive about being reactive, I guess is the way of putting it. But the life cycle of getting ready, being instrumented, then being able to detect and analyze the specific incident, being able to contain it, and once we understand that, being able to understand how we can recover from that, and then taking the lessons learned and use that to re-instrument and prepare once again for the next incident. That's a good take and a typical take on this. So as we've done some research in a dedicated incident response group, and we looked at some of these issues, and some of the high-level things we think about are it's very important to understand the difference between how traditional IT works as well as how the different types of cloud, whether it's deployed privately or publicly, or most importantly probably the different delivery models of software as a service, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, that it's very important to understand those differences, and it's very important to understand what do we need to get out of that from an incident response perspective, and can we get that to be something that's baked into a service level agreement. And we don't get perfect in cloud as it relates to incident response and threat detection, so working directly with cloud providers, but we should have those goals, and then we just end up doing the best that we can. So as we did some of this research, and there will be later on a URL that I recommend that you use to go read some more in depth about some of the research we've done in the incident response area, is it's very important that we figure out how we integrate what the providers have with your own processes and tools. In some instances, your tools are going to need to change. They need to be, particularly in the infrastructure area, very friendly with virtualization, and they need to be able to capture virtual machine images and be able to do things like that. I'm not going to go through every one of these, but you can see how important log information, how important that access is. And this is kind of a message to both providers as well as customers to be able to think about, from a proactive perspective, how much of this do you have access to? Do you have access, and if you're managing the web server, you have access to those logs. If you are spinning up different virtual machines, can you see within each of those guest OSs what's going on? Can you see what's happening in the hypervisor perspective? Can you, at different areas, capture relevant network traffic, firewall logs, other things like that? We have to be somewhat creative sometimes because we may not get direct access to all the log information we want. So we need to see how can we appropriate that information in other areas or with other providers. So that ends up being very important, and I sort of generically say the more log file information you get, the better. But definitely we need to understand, are there different tools we need that are more cloud-friendly and more cloud-updated that are able to capture forensics types of information within those given environments. And again, there's no super easy solution there. It ends up being certainly a challenge. And then what's very important in communicating with your provider proactively is to understand, how they handle these sorts of things. How do they, if they don't give you direct control, and the further you get up the stack, like software as a service, you have less direct control there, is how do they preserve information? Maybe you have a court order and you need to do it as part of this. How does that chain of custody work between that provider and understanding? How do they do that internally? And then how can that information potentially get shared or passed on to you? And spoliation is a legal e-discovery term, but essentially if the information you need to take, not just to respond internally, but to do something from a legal perspective to get some other action, it's very important to not have that information be in doubt and to be thought to be spoiled. So very important areas that we need to be thinking about. So we've got to have tools. A lot of the existing incident response processes work very well. A lot of what you've learned there makes a lot of sense. But we need to have updated tools, and we need to figure out how do we get the appropriate information from the given provider that we have. So some of the things that I've talked about, and then a couple others that I just wanted you to be aware of, is one document that's really good that we didn't do, but it's the ISO 27037 standard, which is good guidelines for incident response that again take that full life cycle. And it's a good read. It's an easy read, I think. And so that can help you sort of benchmark what you're doing to make sure, am I covering really all the bases there? And then what we did at CSA is we took the 27037 and we mapped what we thought were cloud-specific issues. And I really only scratched the surface there, and so I'd encourage you to go download that document and see more specifically how the different versions of cloud infrastructure platforms, software as a service, how they all apply and what the considerations are there. CSA is also restarting and standing up a new project called Cloud CISC, Cyber Incident Sharing Center, and that's something that we are trying to encourage greater sharing, and I think that's going to be a lesson we're going to find. Organizations are going to add more community-based and open-source threat intel and incident information into their own internal incident response solutions and processes that they've had by necessity. It's going to help us be more proactive, and so that's a project that we're very interested in. And then our general guidance that's been around, it's got some good considerations about incident response. And also our provider, what we call our provider assurance program, CSA STAR, which is based on our controls matrix. This will seem as more, this is a compliance area, but if you dig down in here, you will see that a lot of the questions and control objectives actually ask things you want to know about the provider on if they are prepared to partner with you on incident response. Can they get you the information you need? And also, how do they handle a lot of these things internally, and how do they work with law enforcement, requests for information, a lot of different things in there. So very important stuff to go look into. So hopefully that gives you a good reading list to work with. So there's contact information for CSA, info@, and you can go tweet with us, and I encourage you to follow up on any questions you have or any suggestions you have on more we can do in this particular area. So I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity. I want to thank SC Magazine and Palerra for letting me be here. And hopefully that gives you some information about where our brains are around thinking about the threats that are out there in cloud, as well as how we think about how we can best respond to these. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rohit.
Great. Thank you very much. Jim, for that incredibly useful insight on incident response and detection for cloud services. I will request Greg, to hand over control, if you will, to me, so that I can walk through the slides on the screen. As the folks at the SC Magazine had mentioned right up front, this is Rohit Gupta. I am the founder and CEO of Palerra. Palerra is a technology innovator here based in Silicon Valley. We are we're focused very specifically on managing the entire security lifecycle for the cloud, and our venture-backed have very, very strong alliances with several providers, with Salesforce and Amazon. In fact, we are the first and only certified security platform by Microsoft and their Office 365 team. So we're still certainly looking for to share more about what Palerra is all about and how we help enterprises in their approach towards threat detection and incident response for their cloud services. All right. Again, if the folks at the SC Magazine can convert, if you will, the control to me, I'll be happy to essentially walk through the slides. Thank you very much. If we could go to the next slide, as such, from a cloud security perspective, Palerra has been a member of the Cloud Security Alliance right from the get-go, and we're thrilled to, if you will, be a corporate member with Jim's support in the Cloud Security Alliance. We've also had several accolades, if you will, over the year, including from CRN Magazine, from Always On, as far as being some of the, being an innovator to watch. Now, very specifically, as far as the lifecycle approach to cloud security that Jim referenced, if you really think about it, there's multiple phases that essentially go towards the security lifecycle for applications or workloads running in the cloud. These specifically start from preparation through detection and analysis, all the way to containment and eventually incident response or recovery. Now, there have been multiple instances, if you will, that we've noticed in our industry. The good folks at the SC Magazine have reported on that, whether it was, if you will, the large breach that took place at JP Morgan Chase, or the notion of large industries, large enterprises receiving a flood of alerts and not being able to effectively respond to that. The reality, though, is at the end of the day, unless threat analytics is tightly coupled with incident response, it becomes particularly challenging, it becomes particularly cumbersome, and then the onus then falls upon the enterprise, i.e. all of us, to essentially manage that life cycle when something bad happens, when something goes sideways. And so, hence, for these security frameworks to be effective, threat analytics and incident response must be tightly coupled to essentially prevent any gaps, thereby giving the confidence, if you will, to consuming workloads and applications in the cloud. Now, what is threat analytics for the cloud? I mean, as Jim again talked about, I thought he made a terrific point when he presented the content around log access and data preservation looming large. There's several challenges just dealing with the incredibly diverse nature of workloads that run in the cloud. If you think of infrastructure as a service, if you think of compute and storage, you've got to deal with things like perimeter network logs. You've got to deal with DNS logs, host OS logs, API logs. There's a wide spread there. If you think of now the platform as a service layer or the software as a service layer, you're now moving into other dimensions, things such as web server logs, database logs, or application usage logs. And pulling all of this together is particularly cumbersome, particularly challenging when you're dealing with an ephemeral infrastructure. It's one of the reasons why we personally believe that static approaches or static threat modeling in general cannot be applied or is generally not effective for an on-demand cloud infrastructure. Dealing with this diversity and consolidating security data across infrastructure as a service all the way up to SaaS, is required for a holistic view and requires a new approach. You've got to be able to solve this problem at scale where you correlate data across different infrastructures that expose different APIs and essentially, and figure out a way to essentially make our respective lives a little easier. And so to that extent, a combination of approaches to threat analytics we believe is required. This notion of detection, defining policies, defining models and baselines to identify known threats, and combining that with prediction, meaning using machine learning techniques, using novel approaches in data sciences in terms of innovation that's happening in data science to discover unknown patterns, to discover patterns that have not been seen before, is required to keep up with this rapidly evolving threat landscape. If you don't combine these two, you'll always be playing catch-up, and that's what we see within enterprises that essentially are consuming workloads at large in the cloud that are essentially dealing with just the sheer volume of what's going on in terms of the threat landscape. Now, the visual that you see on the screen here, we've specifically called out an instance where you've got sensitive content that, let's say, a user, either an employee or someone has downloaded from an application such as Box, the file sharing, the very well-known file sharing application. Now, this content has been tagged as confidential. There are specific policies that determine that this content is confidential. Now, this particular user then uses an Exchange component, an Exchange Online component to email these particular files or this particular content to somebody from at a competitor, somebody with a domain that essentially represents a competitor to who they are. That right there, the ability to span across cloud services without writing rules, without having to know that this is indeed something potentially malicious going on, and analyzing and calling this out as a specific threat is functionality that we believe is core to what enterprises need. The ability to monitor, to understand what's going on, do that without interrupting user experience, but then being able to correlate at scale across your cloud services, whether it is SaaS, whether it is infrastructure as a service, and then associate that with the set of threats that Jim talked about, things such as insider threats, things such as data and account hijacking or data loss that is about to happen. Now, at the end of the day, though, threat analytics has to be combined with incident response. And this is this notion of the yin and the yang. If incident response is not tightly connected or coupled with threat analytics, you've got a fundamental gap that essentially has emerged in your security lifecycle. Now, comprehensive incident response, requires that there is a fair amount of incident tracking, incident logging, but something that essentially has to be done right away to drive containment, i.e. ensure that whatever has happened is not spreading. That's part A of the incident response lifecycle. Part B of the incident response lifecycle is remediation and then eventually recovery, eventually complete recovery in a form factor that you can essentially take to your auditors that is attestation ready, that the system has been returned to steady state such that nothing else, if you will, is currently active, or you're confident that there's no issues, if you will, at hand. And so from a Palerra perspective, we believe that there are fundamentally a couple of primary approaches towards incident response and incident response automation that's important, and that are important considerations. First, containment, which is changes that can be made directly to the cloud service, whether it's SaaS, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's platform as a service. The containment phase, changes that can be made directly there when something is detected, when something is analyzed and identified, to ensure that it does not spread. That's the first part of it, and those changes typically are made directly into the cloud service. The second part of that is the downstream recovery and remediation, and that can be orchestrated as well in a couple of different form factors. It can be done through integrations with your existing IT investments. It can be done through an integration with an existing change management system. It can be done by connecting with the appropriate set of capabilities, such as an identity governance system if you're talking about, let's say, revoking a group membership, or a password management system if we're talking about, let's say, forcing someone to reset a password, or a multi-factor authentication system if we want to step up authentication or step up the authentication scheme in the future for specific sets of users. But at the end of the day, this notion of coupling these together, automating this incident response lifecycle, is critical. It's absolutely imperative to ensure that there are no incidents that are lost in the shuffle, and thereby having that confidence as an enterprise that both the containment and the eventual recovery is delivered at scale across your cloud services. So let's talk through another incremental visual as well. And again, this is a Palerra example. Very specifically, when we find that there's an incident, when our service analyzes that there's a particular incident that's been found, the first thing that's done is it is automatically logged. Then the next thing that's done is a structure which is initiated around containment. And in this case, let's say that the containment required a temporary disabling of the user's account in the appropriate cloud service, or a temporary action that says the user can't access this service for the next 4 hours or the next 6 hours, to ensure that there's no more, if you will, further activity or malicious changes that this particular user can proliferate inside that workload. That's sort of the next step. And then the last piece is, once the appropriate forensics are completed, the recovery action could span a variety of different outcomes. The most extreme of that is disabling or deprovisioning the user account completely if we believe indeed that he or she is a malicious insider. It could mean that the group membership is revoked. It could mean that this particular user's role is changed so that they don't have access to certain types of applications or certain types of workloads under certain conditions. And again, to that extent, incident response thereby spans, this notion of automation is spanned through the entire life cycle, ranging from logging to containment all the way through remediation and recovery. Now, Palerra itself, our product is called Loric. This is a SaaS-based service available both in public and private cloud form factors that requires no hardware, no software, no agents. What we do is automate the life cycle of security for your workloads and applications running in the cloud. The platform is very straightforward, offering 4 primary capabilities. We do threat detection. We look at user activity, whether it is employee, whether it is end user, whether it is sysadmin, understand baselines, build baselines on the fly, assess behavioral anomalies, combine them with threat intelligence feeds that we pull into our platform, completely abstracting you from it to determine what's good, what's bad. Going hand in hand with this is a set of very, very tight predictive analytics where we essentially do threat modeling continuously. Think of the Rubik's Cube metaphor, where we're continuously essentially modeling multiple outcomes and seeing what is the most realistic. but these are our own techniques and our own modeling algorithms that we bring in to essentially evaluate the state of the application, the state of the user across hundreds of thousands of threat vector attributes. The third capability that Palerra brings to bear as part of the LORIC platform is configuration monitoring, continuous configuration monitoring. It is our belief that configurations, activity at sometimes might, whilst it might present a false positive, configurations never lie. They're either black or white. And if you have an environment where you've got a configuration that is enabled that potentially leaves an accidental backdoor into a workload or into an application, that puts you at risk. That puts the environment at risk. And so you've got to be very careful. You've got to continuously look at configurations such as, what are my password policies? You've got to look at, what is my encryption strength? Are my SSH keys being rotated continually? You look at configurations that are, again, application dependent. So something like a SaaS application may have a set of security configurations that are unique to it, whereas an infrastructure service like an Amazon EC2 or a Windows Azure will have a different set of configurations for it. And so the ability to look at them at scale, and then if we find configuration drift, reset it back to an environment that is essentially safe and reduces the risk posture, we think is critical. So that's the third bucket of capabilities. And then the last piece that Palerra brings to bear is the complete incident response framework. As I've just talked about with a couple of the visuals earlier, the incident response framework essentially automates the notion of forensics, incident management, all the way through to remediation, keeping in mind very specifically that incident response has to take into account both the containment phase and the recovery phase. And that's what we do. We have a built-in framework that connects, if you will, directly or drives remediation by connecting directly to the cloud services in question, or integrating into your existing IT investments, whether those are ticketing systems, whether they are change management systems, whether they are identity management systems, or more. That is what this framework brings to bear. These are the primary capabilities of LORIC, which is, again, Palerra's cloud security automation platform. This is a SaaS service available both in public and private cloud options that you can take advantage of without the need to install hardware, software, agents, or change any user behavior. Today, our customers are able to benefit and rest easy with the LORIC platform. Why? First, you get gap-free protection across your entire cloud stack. There's no gaps. We're able to essentially automate the security lifecycle, whether it is for your infrastructure or your SaaS applications. It covers the full breadth and depth of that stack. The ability to achieve and hold on to your compliance objectives through continuous monitoring. This monitoring is not a one-time action. As applications change, as workloads change, and their configurations change or potentially drift, you want the ability to have something behind the scenes that is looking at it and ensuring that they are reset back to steady state in an audit-ready steady state that that allows you as the enterprise to essentially achieve your compliance objectives. And then lastly, cost savings resulting from the automation of this lifecycle. At the end of the day, eliminating manual approaches where, let's say that you've got to write a bunch of custom rules, or you've got to essentially do a bunch of manual forensics, or things that essentially, let's say you get a slew of alerts that then you've got to go figure out whose priority is higher, what needs to be done, and then where do we specifically essentially, take action. The automation of all of these sorts of activities, of this entire orchestration, is what the LORIC service does, and that's what we bring to the table through our SaaS service. And so to learn more about the LORIC service, certainly Palerra.com has a bunch of information. You can look at a free cloud security buyer's guide at the link that's on the slide right there. This slide deck will certainly be made available to you all, and so you'll have the opportunity to get the link from there as well. But Palerra.com, as well as our Twitter handle at Palerra Inc., is certainly a spot where we welcome you to join us and continue the conversation. So with that, what I'd like to do again is thank Jim for his comments in today's session and thank the SC Magazine for hosting the session for us. We'd now like to move over to the Q&A section, and for that, I'll turn the floor over to Greg, to you, and to the media team to open up the floor for questions.
Okay, thank you, Rohit, and of course, thanks to Jim for your presentations. I believe we've been given a thorough perspective and innovative solution. We can take questions from the audience now. We've gotten a good number in, and I encourage you again to just type them in via the interface. And if we don't get to them during the session, they'll get back to you via email. So the first question I think is for Jim. Where does the responsibility of the cloud provider end and the enterprise begin?
Well, that's a good question, and I will try to give an answer that doesn't become it depends, but to understand that there's a variety of different scenarios. So one thing that's really important to understand that as we think about infrastructure as a service as being basic storage and compute, and software as a service, the other range where it's a full business application, that the tenant or the customer, they end up having the responsibility, ultimately in either case from a compliance perspective. But when you talk about this process and the projects itself, then the infrastructure as a service side, this is basically the job of the enterprise to understand with this raw storage and compute, how do I instrument that in a way, and what do I add to it, so that, for example, what do I have to capture the activity within a virtual machine, or what applications am I building on top of that? Have I instrumented those with the proper logging? So that ends up becoming a lot of things that you can build. There can be some things that you contractually want to ask for in the SLA, and I put some of those in that one slide on some of the objectives and some types of logs you want to get. When you get to software as a service, this ends up becoming something that the provider needs to provide a lot of those sorts of access, and it becomes more of a contractual or an RFP and an SLA that you set up beforehand. So it's very important that you understand what capabilities they have. I think what really had pointed out, and what we're actually seeing a lot in the market, is we don't know exactly what we're naming all of these great new innovations that are happening, but between the cloud provider and the enterprise, this idea of a cloud security broker market providing a ton of different solutions, whether they are encryption or their compliance monitoring or everything else, but this space as well, and I think that's what Palerra is doing so well here as a young company, is it's going to be a big challenge for an enterprise to do all of these if they're a large company and they maybe have 1,000 different cloud services. So we're going to see this rise of the middleman, this broker that is able to help bring together a lot of this information and maybe even look for trends across a lot of these different areas. So the enterprise doesn't get off in any of these cases, but it's very important that you understand the different types of cloud solutions that you're connecting to, understand their capabilities, and then be able to augment that with your solutions or other partner solutions.
Thanks, Jim. Rohit, did you have anything to add to?
No, I think that's Jim hit it right on there, Greg, which is really sort of centered around the fact that when you've got a spread of and diversity in your environment, whether it's infrastructure or applications, you've got essentially to look at ways by which you can normalize or harmonize across this diversity or this distribution in your environments. And that's where technologies and tools, there's new innovation that that is being brought to the market. A broker, the term that Jim used, I think is a good one. Brokers, a security broker can play multiple roles, and there's whether it is threat detection and incident response on one end of the spectrum or encryption on the other end of the spectrum. The notion of being able to harmonize across these, various diverse technology choices in the cloud that enterprises make, and then, if you will, leverage that towards a risk and security posture that is relevant, if you will, to the appropriate enterprise, we think is the ideal path forward, or the recommended path forward.
Okay, thanks, Rohit. Here's an easy one for you. Does Palerra have a presence in Canada?
Yes, we do. We support our Canadian clients through a variety of different organizations and partners that are based in Canada, whether it's Toronto, whether it's Vancouver, whether it's Calgary, and we'll certainly, if you will, be glad to work with the person or the appropriate folks that requested that information to further understand their needs.
Okay, very good. Here's one. How can we provide an equivalent monitoring and incident response equal to that provided in-house when in the cloud we have a supply chain difficult to synchronize and not able to select the events we want to monitor?
Yeah, maybe I'll take, this is Rohit. Let me take a first pass at that, and then I'll certainly welcome Jim to add in his color into that. This question that's been asked is frankly, is spot on. It is exactly why, there's the need for a new approach to essentially help enterprises deal with this vast, diversity and I'd say fragmentation to a large extent of what is out there in the cloud. Look, the providers are doing their hardest, their best to essentially deliver a quality service to you as the client. At the end of the day, they leverage their own technology choices. These technology choices spread across multiple dimensions. It's at the infrastructure layer, the operating system layer, the VM layer, all the way up to the application layer. And the need to be able to essentially abstract the complexity or the potential complexity when you have to go across all of these different, layers requires a new approach, a new innovation, a new way of thinking. That is what, the Palerra platform is really sort of built in mind with. It's the ability to abstract the enterprise's complexity or perceived complexity of having to go in and, herd cats, if I were to use that term, around what are the various technology choices that the various providers have made, and then harmonize all of that without having to learn the APIs and the event streams of each and every one of those back-end providers in a form factor that is simple, that is easy to understand, and that is universal, is really where the next generation of innovation, particularly around threat detection and incident response, goes towards. We're very eager, to work with Jim and team, particularly around helping develop standards in this space as well, because we do believe that as the cloud, maturity model continues to evolve and continues to expand, the ability for solutions to and enterprises to take advantage of event aggregation and correlation mechanisms across a diverse set of infrastructures and applications and tie them to an incident response framework, we think is critical. And so Palerra is committed towards making those investments required around driving standards through the Cloud Security Alliance towards this. Jim, feel free to add more from your perspective as well.
Yeah, very, very well put, Rohit. And you know from a business perspective that businesses are not adopting cloud services in order to make specifically incident response better. They're trying to solve business problems. And so we are chasing that. And I think very much creating some standards that will help in communicating. Here's some uniform types of reporting and data sharing that can be done are going to be very useful. It is a work in progress, but I think we'll also find that there's going to be a lot of interesting opportunities in cloud of using some different data sources that we don't have internally to augment what we have happening internally. So while internal standards for how we do the incident response it's laudable that we look at that as a benchmark. We have to understand this is a new environment, and we're going to invent some new things, and we're going to innovate some new areas. And CSA is definitely trying to capture the areas where we can provide standards there. And I think we actually have the technical standards in a lot of the logging and the encryption, and it's really assembling these and communicating them. And here's a good acceptable framework that all different providers should be able to do.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I think having the CEO of the CSA on the line is the right expert for this question. Why should anyone move to cloud? If someone is concerned with privacy and security issues, how can they be convinced?
Well, I think that you could make this argument about almost any new innovation and technology that when we're security people and professionals, we tend to look at the bad part and the downside of any new type of technology, and that's why information security for years kind of gets left out of the discussion and the conversation. So cloud provides so many benefits and opportunities for innovation and solving so many of society's biggest problems. So that's not even a question. However, I will say that having spent a lot of time with cloud providers, when you talk about Tier 1 and even Tier 2 cloud providers, they spend a lot more on information security than the typical enterprise can do, and they're more secure. And you look at the big incidents that have happened in the past year, those were traditional IT attacks. They were not cloud attacks. So the weaknesses are in the enterprise, and it's in the long run, it's more secure. The issue is an issue of communication, communicating the security best practices the provider has, and more technically or operationally communicating this type of information that we're talking about today that's related to specific incidents as well. That's what we got to get to. But if there's not a question of should we move to the cloud, we're already there. I find in a large enterprise, they only have visibility to maybe 10 to 20% of the cloud they're even using because so much of the procurement is being done in a decentralized manner. So we have to get past that, and we got to say, how do we do the best job putting this together in enterprise security models, work with this on a holistic basis.
Okay, Rohit, I think there's a good follow-up question for you. Cloud providers already provide security. What are the benefits of having an additional layer?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Greg, I mean, when you think of the capabilities that the cloud providers deliver, they are doing a terrific job across the focus area that they're in around securing the specific domain that they focus on. So things such as, let's say, compute infrastructure or storage infrastructure, or let's say a CRM application or a collaboration application. The provider obviously is focused, if you will, on providing the most secure, the best user experience for their domain. The challenge that enterprises though have to deal with is the fact that the volume of threats, if you will, around in the environment that surrounds us is massive. There's things such as, and Jim talked about, he had a list of where he sort of talked about understanding various cloud threats, whether it is account hijacking, people trying to essentially, maliciously get to information on the inside. At times, accidental, usage or accidental, actions that essentially result in breaches that essentially span across cloud services, across providers. That's where, if you will, the span of control, if I were to use that term, starts to essentially, become a little bit challenging for an individual provider. And that's where, when you think of orchestration, when you think of frameworks that are required that span across more than one cloud service, I like Jim's term around calling it a security broker. a broker means different things to different people, but at the end of the day, it is this notion of having a trusted third party that can essentially help an enterprise, deliver assurance across not just one but multiple such, cloud providers. At the end of the day, it's about delivering, if you will, a high level of assurance without impacting user experience, and that certainly is Palerra's belief.
Okay, thank you, Rohit. Is there a repository of incidents in the cloud today? Who can take that one?
Well, I can tell you there's a variety of different incident types of databases. I've not seen anything that is authoritative that's cloud specific, and that's why when we did our project, we essentially scanned a lot of different news sources and compiled something. We haven't published that ourselves, but there's a lot of information in that vulnerabilities report that we did. You certainly can see a lot of cloud incidents in like web application incident databases, and the different certs have a lot of very good information there. But I hesitate having people focus too terribly much on that, because what we find is we miss what a lot of those other threats are, and that's why the analytics aspect of what we're doing is very important. We want to catch the next guy, not the last guy.
Okay, and Rohit, I think.
Go
ahead.
I was just going to add to that. I think it's one of these where I endorse Jim's comment, which is at the end of the day, the publishing, if you will, of incidents that are cloud provider specific or such. I wouldn't necessarily get caught up, if you will, on having a repository where that information is collected or such. I'll say this: cloud providers do a great job, and especially the more mature ones, in terms of publishing, if you will, issues that they've identified that have been reported to them either by their partners, by providers like us, or by their customers, and essentially then talk about steps that they're taking to remediate and address those specific issues. So I think that's certainly something that I'd encourage the audience to make the ask of the providers themselves if that question does come up. I will say this: the other dimension to this is recognize, again, back to the term of the broker, and that is brokers, technologies that essentially that span across cloud services, like the Palerra Loric offering, do take into account what they see across all of the various cloud providers, and that they're monitoring or that they're essentially managing, and then try and leverage that as part of and the overall assurance framework that the enterprise is looking for. So brokers could play a role, if you will, as well in helping drive a greater level of assurance.
Okay, thanks, Rohit. I think we have time for one more question. If a cloud protection solution is already in place, what kind of security threats are we still vulnerable to without detection and incident response solutions in place?
Yeah, I'll take a first pass at that, and certainly welcome Jim to answer in as well. This is one of those questions which, again, I'm never a fan of giving the "it depends" answer or response. But cloud security means so many different things, and so if we're talking about cloud access control or authentication, that's certainly an important element of a broader security layered defense strategy that enterprises consume. But authentication is just one element of the broader security story. As we've talked about today, credential compromise, account hijacking is a very common problem that we all deal with in the industry today. And so having something that goes beyond just trusting the credential is something that an enterprise should consider. And so to that extent, it'll vary depending on, on a case-by-case basis, but we think a holistic approach should look beyond, just one siloed or one specific vector as part of a broader layered defense strategy. Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say layered defense. If there's one thing we've learned is that there's no silver bullet, and if someone has a cloud protection solution, it's not 100% effective, and there's a lot of different diversity of cloud solutions. And so having this layered model, that gets you closer to having the right amount of security. And, this is all continued to be based on enterprise risk management, but that layered model is exactly why you need this.
Okay. Thanks, guys. That's going to have to be it for this session. Let me extend our thanks to Palerra's CEO, Rohit Gupta, and Jim Rivas, CEO of the Cloud Security Alliance, for sharing their insight and expertise today. And, of course, our thanks to all of you for tuning in. This webcast will be available on demand beginning tomorrow on the SC Magazine website under the Events tab. A lot of you have asked about receiving PDFs. As Rohit mentioned, those will be sent out to you as a PDF. Palerra will send those out to you in their follow-up. So thank you, everybody. Good day.